this question is as much for Gina and Julia as anybody. What gets in the way of taking Girl Talk or something like it on the road to Chicago, New York, or rural Mississippi?
Money and graduate school.
Here, let's say again.
I have a day job.
Filthy lucre, my friends. Filthy
Money.
lucre.
Money. Yeah, really, it's money. We wanted to take the show on tour. Yeah. It's about the fundraising part. Do you want to say? Fundraiser.
Yeah, we're looking into it, and if any of you want to help us take this on tour, do let us know, because we would love to bring this to people.
Hi. A lot of the things that stuck out for me from what I heard is you all trying to negotiate sameness and difference, and things that stuck out were sameness as a form of self-love, and also difference. It's important to celebrate difference as you form community. And so I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on the role of race and how you have constructed your community among cis and queer women, or more specifically about the role of white femininity as a basis for forming community between cis and queer women, or proximity, nearness, or intimacy with white femininity as a basis for forming certain kinds of community among cis and queer women.
Toby, you want to hit this first, or shall I? We're going to represent Browntown up here. There are so many things I was so ashamed of my body for years, because I grew up in a small town in Oregon and they told me that they were ugly, and I learned that they were ugly about men, and I learned that they were ugly about women, and it turned out they weren't white. There are so many ways that I never really learned to be an adult woman in community until I had Radical Women of Color community. Until I went to the Allied Media Conference in Detroit and met a bunch of my loved ones and built community, and we held each other, and we cried, and we talked about things, and it turned out that I had more in common with all of these cis women of color than I did with a lot of white trans women. And that the ways that I did gender, and the ways I did womanhood, and the ways I did home, and the ways I did love, brown. And
Pick the other one.
Do the good one.
It was brown, is what I was saying. And that a lot of the ways that I felt I had failed as a woman turned out to be ways that I had failed to be a white woman. And a lot of the ways that I had to negotiate womanhood were negotiating womanhood with the sort of the specter of my mother, who is of color, and her issues about race, and the ways I absorbed issues about race, and the ways I was taught to be ashamed of my nose and my lips and the curl in my hair and the shape of my hips, and having women of color community and discourse around the intersections between transness and of colorness saved my life. So those are conversations I think we desperately, desperately need to have in the community, and I'm so glad you brought it up.
So I have more thoughts than I can express right now, but I think one of the examples I want to share is when I was just coming out, I kind of participated in 2 community groups on my campus. The Queer Student Union, where maybe about 10% of the people there got my pronouns right, and the Native American Women's Group, which I was invited in. What? Okay, which I was invited to be a part of. And when transphobic shit went down, every single one of the women in that group had my back. And that was like very meaningful to me, especially because you hear so much, especially in kind of white women's studies settings discussion about how communities of color are more conservative and not together around queer and trans issues. And I think the other thing that I also want to comment on is I used to have really long hair, like all the way down my back. And it was a real struggle for me around identity and personal politics of my identity when I cut it short. I've been very happy with having short hair, and I'm seen as a woman more often with short hair, and I have my butchness validated with short hair, and I am seen as Native a lot less often. And so it's this kind of painful trade-off that like for me to have my gender recognized, I had to trade gender recognition for racial recognition. And that was really painful. And unfortunately, it's a decision I've made again and again and again. And when the option comes up again, that's the choice I'm gonna make. And sometimes that makes me feel like I'm a bad woman of color. But it's where my heart is and what I need.
I just had something else to add. I'm sorry, I'm a talker. I was in a leadership position in a trans advocacy organization, which I will not name. And I was at a training, and they had been so excited to have me there. They wanted a woman of color in the group, and we were at a training meeting, and the head of the organization said something that was racially problematic. And I raised my hand and as gently as possible asked if we could discuss it. I was not invited to another meeting of that organization from being invited to a leadership position. I was blackballed. And when someone said something casually transphobic in my Women of Color organization and I called it out, she called me at home, asked if it was a convenient time for me to talk, made sure that it was and that I felt held, and then asked me exactly how she should go about making it up and what kind of educating herself she needed to do. And then all the other cis women in the organization got together and helped her educate herself so that the mistake wasn't repeated. My great-great-aunt was a trans woman, and very conservative Catholic members of my family who treated her like crap for dating an American, for all kinds of other things, never failed to call her she. And I think that that's relevant, and I think the history of colonialism and the way we do gender is vital. So, next question.
That's the last one.
Okay, sorry. We love you. Come back next year, y'all.